Today's reading is The Peace of Wild Things by Wendell Berry. When despair for the world grows in me, and I wake in the night at the least sound, in fear of what my life and my children's lives may be, I go and lie down where the wood drake rests in his beauty on the water, and the great heron feeds. I come into the peace of wild things who do not tax their lives with forethought of grief. I come into the presence of still water, and I feel above me the day-blind stars waiting with their light. For a time, I rest in the grace of the world and am free. Our platform speaker today is WES Senior Leader Casey Slack.
Thank you, Karen. Heck, folks, I think I'm going to be mostly on this today. Some of you will remember, and others of you won't have been here, about 3.5 years ago when this community and I were on what I think of as a week-long date to decide if we were going to try to have a longer relationship together. I also call this trial by potluck. It is a process by which, having had your search committee look for someone who might be a good match, you bring them here, and on a Sunday morning they speak, and then they spend the rest of the week having meetings with absolutely everybody. And then on Sunday morning they speak again, and then you decide if you want to be in a relationship with them. It's a weird and intense process, as many of you will remember, but one of the things that I remember most clearly from that is that periodically, people would appear in front of me and go, "What do you believe about God?" And I would say, "I'm a witch." That is not an answer. It's not an answer to the question that I was asked. And it was intentionally not a direct answer to the question I had been asked, because I really don't care a lot about belief or not belief in God. But which describes my approach to being part of the world. So I titled this platform Godless Paganism as a way to put something kind of shiny up there, something interesting that might pull you in. But the thing I'm talking about can also be called humanist paganism. It can be called non-theistic paganism. It can be called naturalistic paganism. You could probably even call it religious naturalism if you felt like it, though there are some religious naturalists who would disagree with me on that front. Surprise! So when you think of a witch or a pagan, it is likely that the first things that come to your mind are, 1, green skin, pointy hat. Green hair, no hat. That's the deal over here. The second thing that you might think of is someone who does spells or worships gods or goddesses or a pantheon of such things. And there are a lot of pagans for whom that is how their practice works. That's not me. And that's not a lot of people who identify as pagans or as witches in the modern day. For a lot of us, our paganism, our witchery, is about connection. It's about connection with everything that is, but with a particular focus on connection with the rhythms of the earth and the possibilities of what happens when you choose right relationship with all things. And what happens when you focus your thoughts and your energy in particular directions, not thinking that something out here is going to intercede and change stuff, but thinking that if you work in relationship with the world and direct yourself, you can be grounded, you can be connected, and you can cause something like magic to happen. Now, T. Thorne Coyle, who our opening words came from, she would not describe herself as a humanist pagan. She is a straight up and down, she has some gods and goddesses type pagan. But that book of hers, Kissing the Limitless, was really important in my formation of how I think about my paganism. Because there is this focus, not on here is the right way to do it, but how do you approach the relationship to the earth, the relationship to ancestors and history, the relationship to one another that lets you be part of something bigger than you without giving up science, right? Other people who would not call themselves humanist pagans or any kind of pagan include, to my mind, Carl Sagan and Neil deGrasse Tyson. Also, basically every physicist I've ever met and had a long conversation with like one exception. Because the way that people who are really involved in knowledge of physics, right, which is this like under-programming of the universe, the way they talk about mystery is deeply related to the way that I feel and think about mystery, and the way that a lot of religious naturalists and humanist pagans think about mystery. Mystery isn't supernatural. It's not up here outside of the world. It is the world unfolding, right? You get this same kind of mystic feeling, right? I'm going to say mystic, and it's going to feel a little weird maybe, where you are just so enthralled by all the things you don't yet know or can't know, right? You get the same thing in people who are like very involved biologists and chemists. Actually, a number of people who are like deeply involved in computer science get there too. Because there's all this stuff that we don't understand yet. And we can live into greater understanding of the natural world, of each other, of history, of ancestry. And so when I talk about godless paganism, I'm talking about focus on connection to nature, history, ancestry, and each other. I'm going to go through those kind of one at a time. We've sort of talked about nature, and I think that's the one that is the easiest to see how you connect with in a way that is part of a paganism, right? You think of, I think of witches in the woods maybe running around naked. That's a way of being connected to the earth. It's actually a really powerful way of being connected to the earth. And if it's your jam, I encourage it. If it's not your jam, don't do it. That's how it works. Do things that are your jam. Do not do things that are not your jam. For me, a lot of my connection to the earth, though, is about paying attention to the seasons as they move through, is about making time to go out in nature and feel connected to it. For me, that looks like talking to things that aren't animate in the way that I am, things that cannot talk back. This is everything from my well-known fondness for touching a tree and giving it your feelings. I do that a lot. I go and I find a tree and I say, all right, you've been here longer than I have probably. I like a big tree for this. big old tree, you can handle a lot of things because you have seen a lot of history already. And yes, I am anthropomorphizing the tree a bit. I don't think it talks back to me, so that's just so we're all clear. I don't think that the trees speak to me. But I think that I can have a real moment with another alive thing where I can let go of some stuff that is pulling me down or keeping me from engaging by saying, there is a time scale longer than mine. There is stuff bigger than me. I love to go to the big water, whatever the big water nearest to wherever I live is. Here, I gotta go out to Potomac and go actually see the river where it is at its most intense. But the ocean is a great option. I've had some great conversations with Lake Erie. Lake Erie knows some things that are unpleasant to know. The Potomac actually also knows some things that are unpleasant to know. It's a very different conversation, though, because it's rushing by. It's got stuff to do. Lake Erie and the ocean are just washing in and out, and that's another moment of this thing is bigger than me. Right? Lake Erie is one of the biggest freshwater bodies in the world. The oceans are so big you actually can't think about how big they are. Right? We're so used to seeing the map of the planet that just shows the side with the land. But the other side of the planet is all water. All water and the various deeply weird things that live in the water. When I lived in Los Angeles, there was a particular beach just north of Malibu that I referred to as my existential crisis beach. I would go there whenever I was starting to have an existential crisis, which is a feature of living your life how I live mine. And I would go, and because it was usually not the summer, and because this beach is so far north, it's almost all the way at the end of Malibu beaches. There was never anybody there. And I would sit down on the sand. Some of you will know that I hate sand, so this is like a big deal for me to sit down on the sand. I would sit down on the sand and I would just look at the ocean and say, hey, what do I need to know? And usually what I needed to know was that things come and they go, and there is a rhythm even when the rhythm looks like chaos. That something is bigger than me and will survive well past when I'm here and has been here well before I got here. Sometimes weirder things would happen. For example, one time I was standing on that beach and I was a mess. I am crying, like full on sobbing by myself on this beach. And then all of a sudden, a seal came onto the beach and looked at me. Now, the seal looked at me because I was there. If you came out onto your favorite beach from the ocean and suddenly there was a person with blue hair there, you might be confused too. But I was able to take a lesson from that. Not a lesson that is, the universe sends me seals. The seal more or less sent itself. But that the world is surprising. And that at a moment where you feel empty and lost, sometimes the world does something strange and unexpected that breaks you out of that moment. I saw that seal and I said, oh my God, are you a seal? Which is a funny thing to say to a seal. And the seal barked, and I went, all right, cool. And then we both went back to doing what we were doing. But I have always remembered the way that it felt to just let nature happen at me. To not try to be in control. I never went back and tried to summon a seal from the sea with my feelings. I saw some dolphins sometimes, a whale out in the distance once, and every time it was just, this is the gift you get for choosing to sit and watch. This is the gift that the universe has available because you're here and you're a thing in the world, just like the seal and the dolphins and the whale and, in some way, the ocean itself. I like the stars, I like the mountains, I like the desert, but the desert and I took some time to figure out how to talk to each other. Because I'm not from the desert. I was a visitor in that world, and the desert doesn't want you there as much as some other landscapes do. But there's something really worthwhile about learning how to be in a relationship with something that's a little hostile to your presence, right? You can go to the desert, but you better bring some moisturizer and a lot of water because you're gonna feel real bad if you don't. That's not unlike when you are metaphorically in the desert as a person, right? When you're in a place where things just feel hard all the time, where you don't feel like much is blooming in your life. You need to take care of yourself and learn to look in a different way. You need water and moisturizer, for that matter. You need good food. You need to look carefully to see lots of little tiny lizards running around. To notice the cactuses that make a life out where it doesn't feel like anything should be able to live. Mountains teach us, or teach me, about the beauty that can come from actually destructive transformation. Because mountains come into being in a whole variety of pretty intense ways, right? Plates push together up into the sky, magma erupts from under the surface. Mountains get there in a wide variety of ways, and different mountains have kind of different lessons available. The Rocky Mountains and the big, tall mountains in California, those are stories about all the things that plate tectonics and wind can do. There are these mountains outside of Los Angeles where the wind has caused there to be many spherical boulders, but like a lot of them. And it took me a long time to figure out what was going on there. I would drive out into the desert and I would see this mountain kind of covered in different large round rocks, and I would think, how on earth did that possibly happen? They weren't carved, they were too naturally shaped. What is this? And for me, that was a lesson about curiosity, about remembering to follow up on something that made me go, huh. Instead of deciding I knew or that knowing didn't matter, I looked it up and I found that it was a result of wind. The way that that particular mountain, one, had these bubbles of magma of a different type of rock than what had been on the top of the surface. And then wind, which ate away that top layer, but that the magma bubbles were too hardy to get blown away. So you wound up with this very bizarre mountain that had some interesting lessons in it, even if they were just lessons about curiosity. I'm sure I could pull something out of the wind too, but I'm not gonna do that right now. The Appalachian Mountains, which are much closer to us, have, I think, different lessons, right? Because the Appalachian Mountains are older than bones, right? Those mountains were formed so long ago that nothing on the planet had bones yet. There is something for me, and some of this is my own history and some of this is the history of the world, about the Appalachian Mountains that says, things are so old. You are brand new and full of possibility, but you come out of this same ancient soup. When these mountains were being formed, nothing had bones. And here you are, full of bones, and thinking about it. How strange. So that's nature and a little bit history and ancestry, right? Some of you will know that my own personal history and ancestry involves West Virginia and a holler in the Appalachian Mountains, a holler where there is still not a real city, not a stoplight, and maybe one paved road. It's called Roar, West Virginia, and it is where my mother is from, and it's where my grandparents lived. I learned recently, actually, that my grandparents got married at a Methodist church in Oakland, Maryland. I'm going to go visit it, though I don't know how the minister of that congregation will feel about me or my desire to look at his church. But that bit of history, right, that attachment to where I came from, is part of how I learned to be connected to the earth. My grandparents grew up on farms in Appalachian, Maryland and Appalachian, West Virginia. And they grew up in homes with dirt floors and in places where you had to grow your own food, and in a time where even if you did go to the store, it was not certain that the store had much of anything in it. My great-grandfather worked in the coal mines. My grandfather drove the gravel truck and then the coal truck. And they left West Virginia for Ohio so that Grandma and Grandpa could work at factories. But Grandma and Grandpa held on to their knowledge of being connected to being from somewhere and how to be connected to the earth. They planted fruits and vegetables in a garden that changed over constantly so that the soil never got too leached of nutrients by any particular plant. My grandmother planted wildflowers and more fancy cultivars. She could grow anything. The most beautiful rose bushes I've ever seen were hers. And she knew enough to know that the purple pansies that she planted at her house would be yellow at my parents' house 1/10 of a mile away, because we lived downhill from them. And the soil up here and the soil down here were markedly different. I spent a lot of my childhood deeply confused by how different my mother and each of her 7 siblings were from one another, and then how confused I was about how different my cousins were from me. The soil was a little different. The experience was a little different. Each person was a little different. Sometimes plants that would grow beautifully at my parents' house would not grow at all at my grandmother's house, and they really would or wouldn't grow at my aunt's house outside of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. That where you're planted matters as much as what kind of flower you are. And that sometimes if you're just planting seeds, you actually don't know what kind of plant you have planted. That sometimes you think you've planted a chrysanthemum, and what you get is some sort of weird lily. And in other situations, you think you've planted some sort of weird lily and you get a cactus. Things do not always turn out how you think they're going to, but you can tend to what you've got as good as you can to make it survive in the place it's planted. When I talk about ancestry, I talked about ancestry sometime last month too, and Perry made a really good point about that those of us who are adopted have a really different attachment to ancestry. As people, I think we get a really interesting combination of ancestries we can deal with. There is an ancestry of blood, and if you have known your blood relatives, that's important. And for like some medical stuff, that's important. But what I think is more important is the kind of ancestry that you get to choose, or the kind that chose you, right? Maybe you had a biological family and they didn't choose you. And that can happen in all kinds of ways. I have a number of friends who were disowned by their families when they came out, or were disowned by their families for their political views or religious views. Maybe your biological family sucked, and maybe they didn't and they just weren't ready to have that relationship. But that's not the only family you get. That's not the only ancestry that belongs to you. Part of my own paganism is that connected to everythingness, which means you get to pull on whatever threads belong to you or you would like to have belong to you. So my ancestry is the people who raised and birthed me and where they are from, and all of that is important for me. But also important for me are the people I've chosen, right? And the people who have chosen me. Our collective ancestry, right? The ancestry of WES from the people who decided to build this building here because we could hire an integrated crew to build the building. The people who are the reason we have an FBI file, right? Who were having conversations about race in this building in the 1950s, and not just white people talking to each other about race, but an integrated community talking about the real issues of their day. The ancestry that is Felix Adler deciding that he was just gonna start a new thing, which I feel like gives us a lot of permission to always say, you know what, this tradition doesn't work for us anymore. Time to do something else. The history of all the queer people who came here in the 90s and found a home when it was hard to find any home, but especially a religious home, who offered things at the auction like, we'll take you to queer line dancing. Sidebar, queer line dancing still exists in this city, and we will be doing it. If we want to, because you only do things that are your jam. You do not do things that are not your jam. So the other piece of a paganism is ritual. And I think ritual is kind of a complicated word for some of us, in part because ritual sounds like asking a supernatural thing for something or doing something that you expect to have externally enforced magic results. That is not what I mean by ritual. We do ritual here already, and admittedly, some of us are not as comfortable with it as others. This is a ritual. Lighting this candle is a ritual. Having some words we say is a ritual. That's a ritual of connection and of setting the scene, right? We also have ritual that looks like a liturgy of the year. There's another complicated-ish word for us. But I'm clear that the people who developed Spring Festival and Winter Festival and Remembrance Day meant to be creating rituals and liturgy. Meant to be creating things that helped us go not just through the ebbs and flows of the year, but the vicissitudes of life. That's a $10 word for troubles. I like it a lot. Try it out, vicissitudes. It's fun, it feels good coming out of the mouth. And I think it really, for me, the word vicissitudes really gets to what it feels like. Vicissitudes has in it this up and down rhythm of sound, of going through things like you are on a ship in an ocean that goes up and down and sometimes splashes up onto the deck of the, I don't know, USS WES, I don't call it. That's a Federation starship, not in fact. So ritual can be a lot of things, and I actually have some props up here to show you some of the rituals that you might choose to do and that people who identify as humanist pagans do in fact do. That is to say, rituals that I do and that Robin does. These are the two people in this room who I most clearly was able to grab things from this morning. That's actually, so. So you saw me do something at the beginning of platform. And I did it so that you would have this question left in your head of what on earth was that? So this is Florida water. Sure. It is not, in fact, water from Florida. That would be weird. I don't really know why it's called Florida water. What it is nice smelling liquid in a spray bottle. And in a lot of types of paganism and witchcraft, Florida water is used as a way to get bad spirits off of you. Now, I don't really believe in spirits like that, so I don't use it for that, but I do use it to get other people's stuff off of me. Not because it has special magical powers. I just use it because I like how it smells. But because the action of stopping and saying, I need to let go of all of the other people's stuff that has gotten on or in me in the course of doing my work. So I take this and I spray a little bit on myself, and the scent and the experience of a little bit of mist lets me say, okay, I don't have to hold that. I started using Florida water when I was a hospital chaplain. Hospital chaplaincy, as you might imagine, involves a lot of getting other people's feelings on you, right? You walk around a building all day, appearing in people's hospital rooms, and if you're me, they don't know who you are or why you're there, even if you have a large name tag that says chaplain on it. And so people tell you things, and you experience things with them. And all of that gets their experience into you, and that's super important both in chaplaincy and in life, letting other people affect you. And it can be easy to keep walking around with it like if you're responsible for it all the time. So I would get back from doing my rounds, and I would sit down at my desk, and I would spray a little Florida water on myself and breathe and be able to actually do my documentation, which is hard to do if your brain is full of someone else's feelings, but also would let me go home at the end of the day, right? I would do this before I left the office at the end of the day, and would let me go home without every sad story I had heard so deeply in my brain, without holding on to every death I witnessed that day. You probably get a lot of the world's gunk on you right now, just existing. There is a lot of gunk available in the world. And it can be helpful to have some practices that let you let go of some of that gunk. So the Florida water is a personal favorite. It also might be something as simple as finding a place in your yard or in your favorite park where you can stop and sit and say, okay, I let it go. The magic is you saying, I let it go. The doing something is just underlining with your senses and your body that you have said, let it go. Another practice, one that I know Robin and I share, it's called smudging. I prefer to call it smoke cleansing. I prefer to call it smoke cleansing because smudging refers actually specifically to an Indigenous American practice, which I don't do because I'm not a Native person here. A lot of people, right, when you learn about smudging or smoke cleansing, you will first learn about using white sage or Palo Santo to do these things. And it's about energetic cleansing, so making a space not feel so heavy with what has been there before. We smoke cleanse the office at least once a year. For us, that says whatever feelings I have had in this space over the last 6 to 12 months, I can let go of that. And because we often have intense conversations in our offices and in the office in general, there gets some buildup, not of like a supernatural thing, just of if you use a place for something over and over again, you will feel that thing in the space. So I don't call it smudging, and I don't use white sage or Palo Santo. There are types of white sage that are, if you buy it from indigenous people who harvested it using indigenous practices, cool, have fun. But a lot of white sage that is available for general purpose is harvested in a way that causes there to be less and less white sage available on the planet. And it is religiously important to a number of indigenous tribes, so if you can avoid doing that to them, please. Right, that's part of humanist paganism, and I think all ethical paganisms, caring for connection. So I use, this is my smoke cleansing bundle, which has juniper and rosemary in it. I picked those things, one, because it's hard to deplete our stocks of juniper and rosemary, but also because most people around the world have at some point had some tradition of smoke cleansing. And the traditions from Eastern Europe, which is where my ancestry comes from, are to use rosemary and juniper. So I buy these pre-made bundles, but you can also make your own. And I'm gonna do just a tiny bit of this, if I can manage to light something on fire and hold a microphone. Now, this is a ritual, and I want to be clear that ritual does not actually require you to be all that serious. This is what it sounds like when I smoke cleanse the office. Get out, get out, get out, get out, get out, get out, get out. It's also what it sounds like when I smoke cleanse my house, or literally on any other place. For me, yelling at the negative stuff that has built up in a space to get out is really cathartic. It gives me an embodied experience of, let me let it go, let me force it out. And while I do it, I imagine sweeping, right? This gesture, sweeping all of just the built up gunk. So this is a thing that you can do too. For this last one, I'm actually going to ask that Robin speaks during community sharing time, because this is Robin's, this is not mine. This is a type of candle magic that I don't really do, but that is about focusing your energy and intention. Not about you light this on fire and then like some other thing intervenes to make stuff happen. Just you put intentions or care into the world, and generally that has some kind of effect, at least on your own perspective of how things go. The last thing I want to talk about, and then I'm gonna shut up, is building an altar. So that is one that might sound like kind of overwhelming, because an altar really sounds like worship. We don't really do that. But the altars that I build are not for anyone but me. It's not an altar to anyone except for to connection. So when I build an altar, I take a small table and I drape a pretty cloth over it, a pretty cloth which is there because I like pretty cloths. I put some pretty dish on it. I have some glass that I inherited from my grandmother, and it's a little, it should be a candy dish, but I put my smoke cleansing bundle in this dish from my grandmother, and in that way there is something beautiful and there is something that represents my ancestry. I have a rock from my existential crisis speech that is often the centerpiece of my altar. I have a Hamsa bracelet that my best friend in clinical pastoral education bought me on a trip to Egypt. I have a ring from one of my favorite teachers in seminary. When he passed, he's a Sufi Muslim, and he had an urs, which is a particular kind of celebration of life, and they give out jewelry. And I wasn't able to go to his urs, but one of my friends brought me a ring from it, and so I keep that. I often keep plants that I find, leaves, things from a tree that is important to me, a little bit of sand, a little bit of water that I got from a body of water that I got to visit. Mostly, though, it's about things that remind me of who I am. Usually I put candles on my altar, and they are in different colors because different colors mean different things to me. And you can find all over the internet, like, this is what this color candle means and what it does, and I don't really care about that. I am very much intuitive in this regard. So usually I have a black candle, a white candle, a purple candle, and a blue candle. In part because that is what's aesthetically pleasing to me. In part because I like to have a balance of things that are darker and lighter, to remember that the good, first of all, isn't necessarily white, and second of all, is always met with the bad. That the depths of the sorrow you feel are also the well of joy you can feel. And because I like purple and blue, that's really what that is about. But because those things remind me of the stars and the water and the stuff that I feel most connected to. When I use my altar, I usually put on a playlist of music that does stuff for me emotionally. A lot of times this is the work of slam poet Saul Williams. Some of his early music is like a really core part of my centering life with an altar. But you can do anything that works for you if you want to. An altar can be one candle if that's what you want to do. And it can be nothing at all. It can be just sitting in your garden, just sitting with the WES garden. So the point of all of this, other than to explain some of where I come from, isn't necessarily to say, you must do this, because I am not involved in you must, outside of you must treat each other decently. But you could. And this is something that people who might be in our community, as it happens are in our community, might do. It is also to say that the connection piece is important, however it works for you to do. For a long while, I kept a rosary on my altar. It was a real weird mishmash of religious presentations. I've never been a Catholic. I don't know how to say a rosary correctly. But they're beautiful, and counting beads is rhythmic and helps me bring my mind into a little bit more balance when I'm feeling all over the place. The point is that connection matters, that as a religion of relationship, thinking about how we're relating to nature, to the earth, to each other, to history, to all of it at once, and how those things are pushing and pulling and creating us is important. It is an important part of practicing relationship. Whether you call it a paganism or not, whether that feels like an accurate description of paganism to you or not, actually. No matter how you do it, no matter what you call it, it's important to have practices that bring you back to yourself as connected to everything else. This is incredibly important when the world is rapid fire nonsense, right? When we are experiencing every day just the dumbest authoritarianism. It is really important when there is this pressure to react, to make time to do something else, to set some intentions, to feel your connections, to remember that you're whole and at home in your body, in the world, in community. that no matter what somebody says, you are not a broken or wrong person. You are maybe lost from yourself for a little bit. That happens to all of us. But you are at the end of the day an important and beloved part of everything. And that is not something that can be changed by a law, by a parent, by someone who treated you wrong. Your worth is grounded way down in the earth where the worms are. And I mean that in all of the messiness implied by where the worms are. And that who you are is in the magic of a seal that appears on the beach when you happen to need it, even though that appearance is chaos. That you are at home amongst the vicissitudes of your life. And that your little starship, your shuttlecraft, does not, in fact, have to be out on its own all the time. That there are bigger places and bigger things that you can come home to and rest in. And that is what I hope for you. Space to rest and connect and feel like you belong. It is my dream that this is that place for you. It is my aspiration that this is that place for you and for increasingly more people who need it. It is my intention, the thing that I am thinking when I sweep the bad stuff out of the office, that we have space here where we don't have to hold on to everything forever and where we can be meaningfully at home together.